Okay, so can I have the first question, please? No one has a question. Diane, I can answer your question about PHP. Okay. Can you just type out what your question is if your mic isn't working? Thank you. While she's doing that, I just want to show you what else, or talk about what else people responded on this survey. It looked like the most difficult assignment was the GIST, but followed up very closely by the JavaScript functions, which is kind of surprising. I wonder if you guys went back and redid that. Would it be a lot easier for you now that you've done more JavaScript? Okay. So while she's typing this up, also please think of some questions you might have. Because like I said, I don't have anything necessarily prepared other than what we did before. If you want me to go over anything we went over before, we can do that as well. Okay. So someone asked, I want to know more about how these connect, which I'm assuming you're meaning all the languages. Okay, we can talk about that. Okay. Eric, you didn't use JavaScript on the PHP assignment. What about the tables one or sorry, not the tables, the database one with the video store? Did you use JavaScript for that, Eric? Hmm. Interesting. Okay, so most of you guys did not use JavaScript on that. Okay. Um, I might ask you a little bit later to figure out how you did that, and I can show you what I had. Calvin wants to know how, or he doesn't know how to structure the PHP code. It does seem like spaghetti code. Um, yeah, because there's no really main type thing necessarily in PHP. Yeah, and Andy, I know you were told you didn't have to use JavaScript. I'm just kind of curious how you did it. Um, how did you all do without JavaScript? Did you have buttons in a form or? Well, yes, okay, so you used a form. All right. Okay. All right, I'm gonna pull up. Oh, there. Okay, Diana got a question. We'll come back to all this. Uh, so I managed to compile the PHP assignment that included sessions. Everything worked great on my end. You tested it in three different browsers with no issue. When it came to grading, the TA hit my errors for if the person wasn't logged in. I was unable to replicate the error. Um, hmm. If you're unable to replicate an error that you've been marked off for, I would ask the TA to give you the sequence of steps that he or she did that was able to get to a situation where there was an error. Because just saying that there's an error doesn't really help you learn from your mistake. What could cause um, hmm, So wait, so he says it hit you for errors if the person wasn't logged in. Um, what do you mean by that, Diana? Was it the person wasn't logged in and they weren't sent back to the main page, or they weren't logged
Um,
in?
can you hear
Sorry.
me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, hooray, it works. Okay, sorry, I've been messing with my microphone. So, I had error handling if someone tried to access the content without being logged in. And like I said, I've tested on 3 different browsers, logging in, logging out, sessions work great. He said, and he gave me the testing sequence because it's kind of given to us in the assignment, that he
Okay.
just went in, tried to log in, and when he clicked log in, it said that he needed to log in to access the content. So it was basically saying that he wasn't logged in even though, he went the correct way to get there. But like I said, I couldn't replicate it at all. I was testing in browsers where I had been logged in before. I was testing in browsers I'd never opened the page in before. Couldn't figure it out. And I did ask, what would cause this, and he said he wasn't sure. Maybe it was Firefox, or maybe it was the way his browser handled cookies or something. But he ended up giving me the points back because he couldn't explain why it was doing that.
Oh, so you did get the points back?
I did, but since our final assignment has to use sessions, I think I want to make sure that I understand how to avoid that happening in the near
Well,
future.
I mean, using um, going off what you said, that it was working fine on your end and you weren't able to replicate it. It could be something very simple. It could have been that sessions weren't being handled correctly on the server. I know I had some trouble with the sessions not being handled correctly. They supposedly fixed the situation, but again, they were supposedly had fixed it for my when I took the class as well, and I had to
Mm.
create a what is it, a HT access file with
Oh
some.
yeah, I know that.
Yeah, and that fixed my problem because I think I was having similar issues where something would pop up where it said I was logged in when I wasn't, or no, sorry, it said I wasn't logged in when I knew I was. So it could have
Right.
been just something like that happened.
Okay.
I wouldn't worry too much about it. Sessions aren't. I don't want to sound uh, uh, condescending or anything, but they're not hard. And I'm sure once there's not many ways you can mess it up. I
Okay.
mean, you can just declare it as long as you declare it the correct way and you destroy it the correct way. I mean, using it is just as simple as using a post or a get or anything like that. So I wouldn't stress it too much.
Okay. I mean, I felt like I had a good handle on it, and then one of the people who's also in the class who I talked to quite a bit, she got marked down for the same thing, and I was able to replicate the error on her page, but you know, I couldn't replicate it on mine, so I don't know, it was weird.
Okay. Well, again, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Now I'm very curious. Now I unfortunately I would love to go over some code and really delve into how you guys were doing the last assignment without JavaScript, or show you how I did. But technically, since you can still turn it in for a grade, we can't go over it. But later this term, I would be very interested in seeing someone's webpage, um, how they did it, because I use JavaScript for mine, and I would be very, very interested in seeing how y'all did yours. Because I think JavaScript's easier to use than Forms, but that could be just me. All right, let's see, did anyone have another question here? Someone was asking about Kelvin. Okay, Kelvin. Kelvin was wondering something about the back button in the PHP login assignment. The back button caused errors and wasn't sure why. Um, it could be the back button could cause errors because if you hit back, sometimes depending on the browser you're using, it tries to resubmit the form again or something. And I'm sure you've seen that on some websites where you are doing something and you try to go back and it's like, do you want to resubmit this? And that could mess it up. But what kind of error was it giving you in particular? All right, your dock marks for some sort of chrome. Hmm. Okay, you got the marks back. Well, in that situation where you run up against some sort of browser error, look it up and see what could cause it. And if you find out exactly what error that is, shoot me an email, please, because I'll be curious to see what could potentially cause that error for future reference. Okay. All right. And who else had a question? I don't see any other questions other than how do these things all connect? Do you want to elaborate on that question? How all these things connect to one another, or what's confusing you? I'll get to you in a second, Andy. Just because I asked if I asked someone else a question. Meanwhile, I'll read your question. In PHP, I had a trouble checking that a form text input was blank. Um, you did string compare the title, which was sent in, to a empty string. Did that work, Andy? Did that string compare to an empty string work? Okay. Um, let me pull up mine and see what mine does. I think I used a combination of is empty or is a combination of is empty and is set. So let me go in here and see what I had. But again, mine is going to be different because I used JavaScript. But I might have ended up doing it in the PHP part. So let me pull this up. Here we go. Okay, let me go down here while you're doing that. Okay, yeah, that should work. Um, Eric says, I don't know if this is sufficient, but when I set up my SQL table, I set up the required fields to not null, and it automatically returns an error if a required field is blank. So title was a required field. So let me see how I handled that. Okay. Oh, I went by, I did mine as name. Did I even check to see if it was empty? I don't even think I checked to see if it was empty. Um, that also, Diana's example would be she has not get in your situation be not the get object title. That will only, I think that only works if you don't send a title, but an empty string might still cause a problem there, Diana. Just because I think what you did there, it checks to see if it's set or it exists, but I could be wrong. I don't see myself checking checking for empty strings. Uh, I'm gonna see if I can. Oh, I know. Oh, I did it. I did it in Andy. I did mine in JavaScript. I checked the fields in JavaScript and used alerts. So unfortunately, I can't give you help other than maybe if I go back and look into my my molt table because I think that had something that couldn't be empty. Okay. I used is set. That's what I did. I did is set to see if it was sent, and I think that's all I did. I didn't check for any empty strings. So so Andy, to answer your question, unfortunately, I don't know what the best way would be. Let's see what the internet has to say. They recommend empty. Check empty. I think I mentioned that at the beginning of your question, and Kelvin just said you used empty, or he used empty. So yeah, I would check with whenever you have a question like that. The manuals are pretty good about it. I don't know why I sent that just to Andy. Hold on, let me send that to everyone else. Here we go. Here's the link I just accidentally just sent to Andy. Um, this should work. This should this for empty string is considered empty. A 0 for an integer is considered empty. 0.0 for a float is empty. And then if you have a string with just a 0 in it, that's also empty. An empty array and a variable declared without a value is also empty. Does a post add extra characters at the end? What do you mean at the end, Andy? Terminator character. I've never looked into that. I It might. Um, let's see. Are you talking about for the value that you assign to a key? Okay, Kelvin says, yeah, that's a pretty good way of doing that. Kelvin had used is empty and C types underscore space, and that also eliminates if they just entered or input spaces and not a name. I do not know if post puts in a terminating character. I don't know how strings are handled. Let me see here. Okay, it is saying that it can potentially have a terminating character, but I don't think in this situation for your project you needed to have it, um, because I think this terminating character is used to terminate the entire request and not an individual string. So there might be something wrong elsewhere in your code other than the is empty, but I would definitely try to go back and see if the empty, it's not is empty, apologize, empty works. And if it still doesn't work in a week or so, we can go over it again. By that time, everything will have been graded, and you can't turn everything. You can't turn any of the old things in. All right. Who else has a question? Okay. Excellent. This is. I'll just read this question aloud, Cynthia. I wonder if we can have an overall view of how these languages are being used, maybe a drawing. I know I see some kind of drawing like that in a lecture from server side to client side, okay, how these things connect. But when I was doing my project, it takes me some time to figure it out, especially after JavaScript added. Okay, let me pull out my handy dandy drawing pad if I can find it. Oh, there it is. And I can do that server side type thing that you see in the lectures. Just one moment, let me get it plugged in. Okay. And I need a pen. Where's my pen? There it is. Okay, let me share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. If you can't see my screen, please say something. Okay. All right, so Cynthia, I believe it was Cynthia, she wants to know how all these things work together. All right, so you probably see these, oh, hold on, things are falling off my bookshelf. All right, here we go. So you see these things every once in a while. Why is this going so slow? Oh. Can I shrink this? Something's gone wrong with my computer. I can't see my cursor anymore. And it's not drawing. Let me see if I can draw with a different program. I think a GoToMeeting thing's messing everything up. Yeah, it's all delayed. Hold on. Let me unshare my screen and see if I can draw then. No, it's still upset. Okay. Let me see if I can find a picture and we can go over it instead. Okay. Let us see here if I can find a good picture. None of these are what I want. Okay, that's not good. I apologize, Cynthia. I can't draw a picture. Something's not going well. It could simply just be, I think the GoToMeeting thing's messing with my Wacom pad, or something else is terribly wrong. So I'll keep working on it while we talk. But I will, like I said, I'm trying to. Here, this picture might work. So let's use this. Okay, here we go. All right. So here, ignore all the words. Okay. All right. This will be useful for one thing. This is obviously how to use it's kind of describing the Facebook API. So you have your user browser. The browser, when you click a button, sends the HTML, which is the browser, sends a message to, in this situation where it says your app server side, this could be your PHP. This could be your PHP file, which then sends a request to the API, which could be anything, and then that sends it all the way back to the user. This is not the best example. Like I said, unfortunately, I don't think I'm finding good ones. All right, let me try this again. All right, so I might be able to draw with my mouse instead of the Wacom board. Okay, here we go. I'll just leave that there. All right, so here you have your browser. This is not going to go well. All right, here's your browser. Okay, in your browser you have okay, I'll try to use my Wacom again because this is terrible. Oh my goodness. In your browser you have HTML. There we go. Make this a little bigger. All right, so in your browser you have HTML, and this HTML is loaded into your browser. Also loaded into your browser, you can have JavaScript. So JavaScript can be loaded into the browser as well. It is not a server-side thing, because if you think about it, yes, the file is stored on the server, but it's loaded with the page. You link it to your page, unlike PHP, which you have to send information to. And if you also think about it, in your JavaScript file, you can say things like on document.ready. And that means when the HTML document is loaded, you're ready. And all this stuff it's active, it's interactive, so it stays in memory and listens for things. And it couldn't do that if it was on the server, it was considered server side. All right, so then we move on to this, which I was just going to call this server. And my terrible, feels like MS Paint again. And here you have things like PHP. There are other languages you can do this in. I've seen them done in Python, which is kind of weird, but usually it's PHP. And here you do, these programs are run once and then they're done. So if there's a request from the HTML and the JavaScript, it's sent to the PHP, and then the PHP handles whatever it needs to do. Now we're going to assume what it's doing is going to a database. So over here, you have your database. And then so the PHP will run, and I will put on here, it will run, it'll make MySQL queries. And remember, MySQL is not really a programming language, it's in part of the PHP. So it will do a MySQL query. The database will send back information about those queries to the PHP. And then the PHP, depending on what that result is, it formats it, whatever. And if it needs to, it will send all the way back to the browser as so in this situation you can have JSONs, you can have HTML being sent back and inserted. So that's how this browser server database situation works out. So that, again, you go to the web page, it loads the HTML. If there's JavaScript associated with that web page, it is also loaded into the browser memory. Say you click on a button in a form, it sends that form off to the PHP as a GET or a POST. That PHP receives that request, that form data, decides what to do with it. In this situation, we're using a database. And then based on what that form was, it sends it off to the database as a MySQL query. The database runs that query and then returns the results of that query, the rows. The PHP will parse whatever that is, determine what needs to be sent back to the browser, and sends it back to the browser, whether or not it's as a JSON or you're directly altering the HTML. Does that answer your question, Cynthia? If not, please let me know and I can go over something else. Okay, excellent. All right, so I answered that question. Anyone else have any questions? Anything at all? All right, Kelvin asks, how does PHP work with the JavaScript when the JavaScript causes the HTML page not to reload? Kelvin, unfortunately, you are correct. That is not clear. Let me see. How does the PHP work with the JavaScript to not reload? Oh, okay, I understand. Got it. All right, so Kelvin, let me know if this is what you're saying. How can you use PHP to dynamically change elements of the page without a reload? Is that what you're asking? Excellent. All right, Andy, please remember your question because I'll get back to it. All right, so Kelvin wants to know, how can you use PHP to dynamically update a page? Now, hopefully by now you know that PHP itself runs once and it's done. So you can put PHP inside your HTML file, and when it hits that, when it loads the page, it'll run that. But it's only run once. It won't you can't use PHP to sit there and listen to stuff. It can't be there to change things dynamically. To do that, you need JavaScript. So what you'll do is, well, here, I can show you. All right, this is my video rental store. And what I'm not gonna show you the code, but what I can walk you through what happens. So, all right, so I'm just gonna put in a movie, and I don't know how long it is, so we'll say that. All right, and then so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit add. I have a listener event in the JavaScript. So it's listening for when this button is clicked. So I'm going to click the button and nothing happens. Now it's frozen. All right, what should have happened is I click the button and it loads a PHP file, or it goes to the PHP file. And I have no idea why this is not working. It was working yesterday. All right, so I click this and it's supposed to return information from the database. So the PHP file sends a request or a query to the database. That query is returned as a sequence of rows, and then my JavaScript under here, if we go to inspect element, my JavaScript, I have an uninspected F token. That's probably because I typed something wrong. All right. So if you see here, so this part right here, this div add video, that is just the part at the top. This part right here where it says videos, this is where I add the videos if my program was working, which it is not for some reason. So what happens is in my JavaScript, Kelvin, I have a function that takes the results that are sent back. I use the ID videos to do get element by ID. I empty this object in HTML. There's a JavaScript function. You can empty an element. Once it's emptied, I then build new HTML using the JavaScript and put it into this, like append child to the div. And that is how I have in the past done this type of stuff. All right, you got that? Okay. I don't know why this doesn't work. All right, let's see what Andy's question was. The video from 2 weeks ago. Video from two weeks ago. What did we cover then? Does anyone remember what we covered? I'll try to find it for you. Was it the first one we did? Was that JavaScript? Was it PHP? Or was it the API? All right. So I got one from 2 weeks ago that was the API one. Is that it, Andy? Is that what you wanted? Okay. Let me copy. All right. So here's the link to that. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Jana wants to know what a JSON is exactly. Absolutely. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Let me pull up some. All right. Let's go back to that weather API thing, if I can find it. Here we go. That way we have something to look at. All right. So back here in this weather API, whatchamacallit, and what do I want? All right, here we go. A JSON is just simply a JavaScript object notation. It stands for JavaScript object notation. So in JavaScript, your objects are stored as a series of keys and values for those keys. In JSON, there's a standard format that can be parsed into a JavaScript object, and then also have an object parsed into a string. So if we look here, this chord here, this is the key, and its values are longitude and latitude. And so this is the same thing as saying, let's pull up something here. Um, well, it's not as easy as, let's go down to ID first. Let's talk about ID. So we have an ID. That's like saying ID equals, whatever that number is, and then a semicolon, and then I guess we'll do JavaScript. That's not what I want. So we'll say var weather object, and I'm trying to remember. Does anyone remember what this what this is called when you declare an object piece by piece like this in JavaScript instead of using like the new object? I for some reason I can't. Literal, thank you. It's the literal definition of the object. So it's the same thing as having things like this, in your JavaScript. And it's a lot easier to just store all that. You can store all that information as a string. So when you read a JSON, you read these curly braces. You got to pay attention to where they match up and end and so forth. So because obviously this one ends all the way down here at the bottom. So this curly brace says you're about to get a list. In a list, or if you want to call it a dictionary is probably the better description of it. A dictionary is a sequence of keys and values. So whenever you see a curly bracket, you're going to get a dictionary, which again is a list of keys with values. Your keys are going to be to the left-hand side of the semicolon, of the colon. And they are generally always going to be strings. I don't think you can have them without a string, like a not string key. Well, I guess technically you can, but I believe in JSON you should always be a string. And so in this situation, the first key of this object here is going to be chord. And then the colon says, all right, now the values follows. In this situation, the value starts with a curly brace, which means we now have another dictionary that's coming up. So this itself is going to have a sequence of keys and values. So again, you have lawn is a key, the value is 139. The next object in this dictionary is lat, and it's 35. And then we close that dictionary, and all of this is one thing. Now, when you get to, let's look at weather. So this is a value. Sorry, this is a key. And the value is to the right of the key. When you see a square bracket like this means you're going to have an array. It just so happens in this one situation, the array is only one element long, but square brackets mean you're going to have an array. And this array starts with, again, a curly bracket, so it's going to be a dictionary. And again, all the stuff that I highlighted, that's all in that dictionary. It just happens to be also the first element of the array, which is the value of weather. And then, so if you were to search multiple cities at once, you would have something returned as a JSON from the API where it would begin with a square bracket, because then you would have a array of weather for cities. So you would have an array of all this stuff, and there'd be multiple elements. So if you ever, when you're doing your local storage and you put something in local storage, it begins with a a square bracket, that means you have an array of items. If it begins with a curly bracket, that means you have one object that was returned, and it is a dictionary. Does that answer your question, Jaina? Okay. So if you think now, there's some cool things you can do with JSONs. Oh, what was it? Oh, what did I see? Oh, that's right. It's called JSON resume. And this is pretty neat. And what this has done, this guy just made this little code, and you see here that he has his resume as a JSON object. It starts with a curly bracket, and you have the basics, and then that itself has a dictionary inside it, and then it has another thing, and so forth. And what they do with this is, you see, all this information is all stored in a standardized format. But let me see here. Where are some of the examples? No, that's not what I want. So if you see here, you can change, you can use that same data and plug it into all these different themes, and it just changes based on the data it's sent. So you can do a lot of interesting things with JSONs because it's just a standardized way of having information sent back and forth between objects, or between server and the browser. And I'm trying to think what else. What are the other neat things you can do with JSON? Oh yeah, and it's also because a string's easy to send. The values are really easy to send. They fit into small packets, when you're going over the internet, as opposed to trying to send an entire object at once. It would be a little bit more difficult to send the object. What other questions do we have about anything? Kelvin was wondering about the GIST assignment, where we use Ajax and call the HTTP request.open to access the GIST API. I thought .open is not able to call third-party domains, but we ended up doing that in that assignment. Is the usual practice have Ajax do a .open on a PHP file? And then have the PHP file grab data from the server instead of directly. I'm not entirely sure what you're asking, Kelvin. It's been long enough so that I can actually show you my assignment. Where is it? Where did I put it? It's not. Did I put it in here? There it is. Okay, so all right. And when you refer to the PHP file, is it the where's my request? Here's my request, but where am I sending it? What's the URL? Okay. Kelvin, what do you mean by a PHP file? I don't see it necessarily a PHP file here in this assignment. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you can do that. It's your concern is, can it call a third-party domain? It can, obviously, because it works. The thing you need to be aware of is permissions and so forth. And in this situation, this API has it's a public API, so it works. And yeah, you need the only way to get that AJAX request off is to do the dot open and then the dot send. The fact that it's a PHP file, it doesn't matter because you can send a request to anything. It can be a PHP file, it can be any other type of language, Perl or anything like that. It doesn't matter. And again, that's really the only way unless you're using other things, but this is pretty standard. So yes, I would say it's appropriate. Does that answer your question? Okay. Okay, Calvin asked why might you need the PHP if you're calling the request on the API. Well, the PHP. Well, again, if you can see here on my screen, I don't have a PHP file. I just have the public and then the pages. If you're referring to something where, let me see here. Let me go to my final project. Where's my JavaScript? That's not what I wanted. I want my other one. Where's my other JavaScript? There we go. So in this situation, okay, again, I don't call it on a PHP file. I call it on a directory. Oh, wait, hold on. No, that's not my request. Where's my request? I can't find it. Where's my send? Huh. It's been a while. I don't even know where my stuff is in this assignment. I have a PHP file somewhere. You don't need PHP to make a request, but okay, here we go. If Calvin, if you look here, you can see that I'm making a request to a PHP file, and that PHP file is what handles the request. So on the other side of your request on the API, there's probably a PHP file that handles the request. It looks into it queries a database and it sends it back to you. So yes, you do need that PHP part if it's part of the URL for the request and the API. In this situation, I'm making a direct request on a PHP file, and then again another PHP file here. Any other questions? And while people are thinking of questions, what are some things you guys are thinking of doing for your how-to? I recommend thinking sooner than later. Eric's not entirely sure. Does anyone have a topic picked out yet? Jane has no idea. Calvin, what kind of API? Or is it any API you're doing? Andy's doing Moodle API. Okay, and Kelvin's doing Daily Med API. APIs are pretty good thing to do because you'll get practice with them, and the more practice you have with them, the better. And you can always find not easy stuff, but stuff you're interested in. I recommend take a topic you're interested in, type it into Google, and then type API afterwards. Like this one guy, he's like, I like guitars. Okay, so guitar API. And you type it in, and then you come up with if my internet wasn't infinitely slow tonight, it would pop up saying, here we go, Songster tabs with rhythm, and has an API, and so there's a lot of things you can do with it. Eric says, I'm wondering what I could possibly find as a beginning web developer that no one else has covered already. It doesn't have to be someone hasn't covered it already. It could be something that I would choose something that you would like to use again in the future. I knew someone in my class did, what is it? Was it GIS? Yeah, he did GIS. This was his project. And then he got a job while he was still in this program, moved across the country from Wyoming to Indiana, and then he got a job doing GIS, which he did for his how-to. So Daniel says, a tutorial for Yeoman. I do not know what this, the web scaffolding tool for modern web apps. That'd be interesting. Did anyone know that Canvas has an API? That's not what I want. What is instructor? There we go. There is a API for instructure the Canvas thing. I use this API for fun to create an automatic web scraper for all my assignments. So I have this thing that I can run. Let me see if I can do it real quick. And I give it the week number I want to look at, and I give it two parameters. T means to-do list, and M means show the modules as well. And this scraper goes in and produces an HTML file. And where is it? Here we go. It produces an HTML file that has all the information I need for, here are all the lectures I have to do this week, and so forth and so on. And so maybe you want to do a Canvas API type thing to help you better study or whatever. So your choices are infinite. You don't have to do an API. Like I said, GIS is not an API. It's more of a how would you say, a data storage method. But you can use anything you want. I did something, what was it, Sunlight Labs? I did this thing called Sunlight Foundation, which is they do a lot of stuff about Congress and things like that, and I did a thing on their Congress API where you can look up your congressman based on, districts and so forth. Eric asks, but if we do an API, doesn't that already have the documentation already written up? Yeah, it has the documentation, but does it, looking at the documentation, does that actually really give you a good way of understanding the API? No. Like, for example, let's look at this documentation here. I mean, this is a lot of information that you're going to be looking at. I mean, all this stuff here. I mean, this got filtering, and a lot of this stuff is confusing. A lot of the stuff you won't need to do it. So you can have a complex API and take it and give it a more approachable example than what they have on here. Because if I click on legislatures here, it's just all these, it doesn't help necessarily. It doesn't help me understand that, this is a bad example here. It doesn't help me understand how to make the request or what I can even do with it. And that's the big thing. what can you do with it? Because all APIs by nature will have documentation. It just depends on how good that documentation is. So if you have, like for example, this one, I said I'm going to teach everyone how in my how-to. I taught everyone how to create a website where you can look up your senators and representative based on zip code. Where's my how-to? Here we go. And based on zip code, and then you could look up laws based on and see how your people voted. So I can type in my zip code here, and it populates my representatives. And if I wanted, I click on the contact info. And so I walked the person through this API, and I taught them how to do something simple with the API. And that is completely reasonable for this assignment. So don't be, as long, now he said don't do simple, like super simple stuff that everyone's done before. But yeah, I would condense it down into something that's approachable. And again, the point of this activity is to get practice, because like I said, I was a high school teacher, and I graduated college with a classical studies degree, and I got a job teaching Latin, and I didn't know Latin. I learned Latin by teaching it to people. So if you're forced to explain something to someone else, you really got to know your stuff, and it helps you better learn it. And I think that's the point of this exercise, is to get you, and also to get you to read technical documents and learn how to parse them and explain them to other people, because that's going to be part of your job, looking at technical documents and figuring out how to make sense of them. Any other questions or ideas or anything? I was expecting more questions. I was hoping for more questions. Does anyone go over how I did the GIST project? All right. First, let's see if it works. Okay. Okay, let's see here. I'm really bad about naming my file. Oh, yes, it is terribly gross and hideous looking. So let us excuse that for a moment, how terrible it looks. That was me practicing with CSS before I really knew what I was doing. So let's go in here and open up these files. I guess I'll just open up this one. Okay. Hopefully that's big enough for everyone to see it. All right, so let me show you what my page does first. The idea I had was I wanted to have a website that was very dynamic in that I used a lot of divs, and from our previous lectures you probably tell I like to use divs to hold stuff. So I have a div up here for the search bar. I have a div for the get list and a div for the favorites. And let me go over to resources, because we're going to be using local storage a lot in this assignment. Okay. All right. So you can see in my local storage that I have an empty thing of listings and pages, and that will come into play when we start doing stuff. So with mine, to load, I loaded one page at a time. So if I want to load the first page, I just click that little tag and it pops up the first page, and you can see that the local storage changes dramatically. All right, Daniel wants on the how-to. I should then be understanding the material enough that I, one, can explain it easily to someone unfamiliar with it. Two, explain how to implement it. And three, potentially give an example of implementation. Yes, I do not believe you have to do number three. I do not think you have to implement it, but I had already written the code to teach myself how to use the API. So I threw it in at the end. I know the example that the instructor gives does not, I don't think he actually implements it completely, but it couldn't hurt and it'd give you practice. All right, so if you look here, I have this big list of GIS, and it goes all the way down, and again, it's terribly gross. So if I were to go back over here to elements, you can see that in my HTML, I now have in my listings div, I now have, I apologize. In my GIST list div, let me see if I can make this bigger. All right, in my GIST list div, which is that big orange block, I now have a bunch of things of the class listing, and each listing represents one of these green, yellow, and black little blobs, or as a unit. And so if I go into one of the listings, like this one, if I go into this listing, you can see that I've given it an ID, and this ID comes directly from the GIST ID. And that way I know how to, which ones to remove, which ones to favorite when I click on the button. And then in here, I have just a link with the title or whatever the GIST was called in that link. There are multiple ways of going about this. You can do it with PHP. With did we do PHP here? No, you don't. We didn't do PHP here. You can directly just say enter HTML equals all this stuff and pump it out. But I chose to do slightly differently. And remember, this is one of my first assignments before I learned more about it. And then for the buttons, I have a class because there's multiple of them. And mostly this class is so that I can do CSS on it. And then I have onClick. This is not the way you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to set up an event listener. We talked about that, I believe, the first one of these sessions. In JavaScript, you should set up event listeners. And if you want to know how to do that, we did cover that in the last section where we created dynamic, what was it? We created dynamic buttons of some sort. I cannot believe I'm drawing a blank on what we did last time. Does anyone remember what we did? I don't. That's not good. Oh, we were doing MySQL stuff. Oh, yeah. We were doing MySQL stuff with PHP, and we had a database of Redskins players. Yeah, so we had a button for updating and removing and things like that. So if you want to know how to, create dynamic buttons and not use the onClick, you should go back and watch that video, because the thing you have to do is anything that is added to the page after it loads, you have to add in event listeners afterwards. Whereas in the previous examples, you had a button that already was there. You could simply do on the onload, document onload, or what was it? Window.load, and you could go that way. All right, I'm getting this link for someone. This was not a GIST one necessarily, Andy. I don't know if you were there for this, but this is the API one where we went over API stuff. Okay, so let's look at the code. And yes, this is JavaScript. All right, on load, let's see if I can split these so we can look at both of them at the same time. All right, let me get rid of that. Andy, we didn't do one on just straight up JavaScript. We started these week 4, I believe, and I think week 3 was JavaScript. All right, so when my page loads, it creates this this top bar. It's that top bar is part of the HTML, and I load favorites. That's a function. I create um, a temporary array, and I store. I just basically create empty arrays as local storage. That's the very first thing that happens. And that's again when the window loads. Let me pull this back up here so go back to local storage so you can see. So again, you can see that I have, well, sorry, let's load this again. I have empty arrays. All right, excellent. So, and when I click on a button, so if we go to the HTML and we look at the HTML here, you'll see that this, where is it? Actually, hold on. Wait, where are these buttons? Where did I put those buttons? They have to be somewhere. That's favorites, this list. Is it part of the search bar? Yeah, they are. Okay, I apologize. All right, so I have an on-click event for all these, and it's load page. So once I click on one of these, it calls the load page function. So we come over here and we look at the load page function. This empty element is a function I wrote, and you send it, and I send it things to empty. I later learned that there's an easier way to do that than using JSON than what I ended up doing, because oh my goodness, this is really big. I wrote this empty I wrote this this function that takes an element and then the type it is, and it removes everything one by one. So I remove child and things like that. That's not the ideal way of doing it. All right, so on load pages, it creates it. It gets which number it is, because if you look over here on click, it says load pages this.id, and the ID is whichever page it is. So that is sent to load pages. It is appended to the end of your request, and then it sends off that request. Once it's ready, it takes that, stores the pages that are returned into local storage under pages. And then I call a filter function, which the reason that is done is, say I want to filter out JavaScript, or sorry, I clicked on Python. All right, so JavaScript, and I want to keep that filter going as I go through the pages. So I always have, that's why that I call the filter every time I load a page, so that it stays the same filter no matter what. And if we go back to resources, you can see that all this stuff changes as I'm clicking things. All right, you notice that listings is different than pages. Listings is has everything in there, and so does pages. All right, so once that is all done, I move on to, I now have stuff, and if I click favorite, it calls a add favorite function in the, oh my goodness, this is really complicated. Set favorite. All right. So I take a favorite, and if you see down here on the right hand side, I've added a favorite, and now I have an array of favorites. And that way, when I refresh the page, it loads whatever's in the favorite list. And again, this is really ugly, all this stuff here. But basically what I do is I build this new thing. I have to create I create a div to hold the green stuff, the yellow stuff, and the black stuff. And then I add them all together I change the text content, and then I push whatever I just added as a favorite onto the local storage. So you see this gets very, very complicated quickly, and it's probably overly complicated than it needs to be. And I could show you a similar assignment or a similarly complex assignment. And this uses JSON. And I mean, JSON is so much easier to use, and I highly recommend you learning it. It's because to create an element, you just where is it? Where's the create element? But you can see that so all this code is much shorter, and it does actually a lot more than the previous code I was just showing you. And so, oh, here we go. So to append some JavaScript or some HTML, you can just say append and just add it. You don't have to create an element for it, and it's really, really cool. So I recommend learning JavaScript. Now, I don't want to go over this entire assignment line by line. Does anyone have any questions about how I did something on the GIST assignment? Oh, I'm breaking up. Can you hear me now? Okay. Does anyone have any questions on exactly how I did something? Because I don't want to go over the code completely because it's kind of long. No one has any other questions? How did I get the 5 pages? Again, if I come over here and go to elements. Oh, okay. What I did was I requested 1 page at a time, Andy. And if I go into, where was that request? Here we go. If I go into this code here, let me make it bigger so you can see it. You can see that I say page equals whatever. You're only ever looking at 1 page at a time. So all these GISTs, that's page 2. And this is page 3. So I'm only ever showing 1 page at a time. I made sure that was okay with my instructor before I did it, and he said it was fine. But the way it works is inside this search bar div, I have this other div called pages. And each of these little page tabs, they're a div themselves. And each of them has a class called page select, and each of them has a different ID. And in this case, the ID represents which page I want to request. So when I click, it calls the function, JavaScript function, load pages, and sends it this, i.e. the thing I clicked, ID, which will represent the page I want. So I'm not getting more than 100 items at a time. I'm only getting 1 page worth at a time instead of trying to get all of them at once. Does that make sense? You can, yeah, with it being limited to 100, you would end up having to do multiple requests at a time, or multiple requests to get an additional 100 and so forth. So say you would load that first 100 and then you would click, say, load next page. Then you would make a new request to the API to get the next 100 elements. Does that make sense? Yeah, a lot of this stuff seems easier as you look back. Like I said, I was looking at this code here, and it's gross and ugly and complicated. And you'll get better. You will get better, especially when you do your how-to. Because all those pages have to be created with HTML, and I recommend you doing something unique with it and practice CSS or something else, something along those lines to make it look better. Mine was made using Bootstrap, which is a thing I believe came out of the Twitter company, and it's just a standardized way of rendering elements on a web page. It's nothing flashy. It's not too hard to do. Any other questions? If no one has any other questions, I'm going to call it an evening. Um, next week. Okay, hold on. I'll get to you in a second, Daniel. Next week, I'm going to make sure the form works again, and I'll have you guys submit questions ahead of time so I can read through those and see what you guys need help on. But also, please make sure you come to these with questions, because again, right now we're not going to have those live coding demos unless there's a lot of requests for a particular topic to be covered. Daniel asked, someone on Piazza recommended using a template. Yeah, like a template. That's kind of what Bootstrap is. It's a template. Well, you can get templates of Bootstrap. Bootstrap's kind of nice because it works on multiple levels. It has automatic changing for changes the width and all that stuff based on your platform. And they have templates for Bootstrap. And if you look at them, like this one just shows you what the buttons look like. And what happens with Bootstrap is you have these tags, and the tags in the classes and the IDs, not IDs, but they all have different. So example, let's see if I can look at this. It's going to be complicated. Let's see, I want this one. If you look at it, see the class is button, button large, button default. And you can technically in CSS have classes that have multiple things in it. And you see this one is button, button large, button primary. And you can use these class ID or these class names to create all these different elements based on. So you wouldn't write any of the CSS. You would just choose what you want it to look like based on whatever class you give it. So I mean, there's another example. See, let's go down here. No, not that. Let's try. Here we go. Yeah. So you have all these labels and drop-down menus and nav buttons and nav bars. All this stuff is standardized, and you can pick a template to use. I ended up using, which one did I end up using? I ended up using this one to do my project, and I think this is the same one that someone else in the example used. And you can just basically copy and paste this source code. You can download if you go to the sources, you can click on it, and it gives you the source code without the little drop-down menus. So you can look at it, and you can take out the stuff that you don't need, and leave all the stuff that you want for your. And here's the CSS file for it. So you download this too, or you link to it dynamically. So yeah, Bootstrap's a good way of doing it. I know it's a long answer to, is it a good idea to use a template? Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, you could even use WordPress. Well, maybe not. Maybe you can't use WordPress. I can't remember what the requirements are for the assignment. I don't know if you have to write all the HTML yourself. I can't remember. But I would use a template. It makes things easier. and you kind of learn something else as well. Don't wait too long to do this how-to. It's not difficult, but it can be time consuming. And because he's going to assign your final project even before this how-to is due. So make sure you get the how-to done first or quickly so that you can do the final project, which is more in depth. Eric says he doesn't think you have to write the HTML. So yeah, you might want to just ask if you can use WordPress, and WordPress is just a blog software, and I'm sure you've seen many examples of how it works, and you can choose a template and things like that, add pictures and whatever. Any other questions before we call it an evening? Okay. Well, thank you guys for sticking it out until the end. Again, I apologize for not getting the email out to you guys sooner, and I'll make sure next week it's sent out earlier. And please look for a email coming out early next week, if not this weekend, about what topics you want to go over next week. And it'd be as if there's not enough interest, we're not going to do another big one. I'll just do individual sessions for everybody. But until then, enjoy your weekend, and good luck on your assignments.